joining us. We will just wait a couple more moments for any last minute people to join the webinar. Alrighty, we'll get started. So welcome everyone to the first HammerTech webinar. Stay tuned, we've got more in store over the next couple of months. I'm Georgia Burgess, Partnerships and Field Marketing Lead at HammerTech. For those of you who may not be familiar with HammerTech, we're a cloud-based collaborative performance and productivity platform, ensuring safety, quality, and operational efficiency. We've brought together a team of experts today for you to help companies of all sizes implement safety into their operations. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to the main event today, our panelists. Welcome to the Calibrate Safety team. We've got Michael Fackler, David Valentine, and Anthony Roy with us. Thank you all for joining us and for working with us to pull this one together today. So let's quickly cover housekeeping. So we encourage you to submit questions as they arise throughout the Q&A function, and we'll endeavour to get to them after the presentation. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to get to know who you are and where you're from. And lastly, if there's any issues, please drop us a line. You can send a message directly to the panelists, and I'll do my best to help you out. With that, Michael, over to you for introductions, and feel free to roll on into the presentation following.
Thank you, Georgia. So I want to take a few minutes to introduce the Calibrate Safety team to you guys. My name is Mike Fackler. I'm the founder of Calibrate Safety. Calibrate Safety is a full service safety and health management company. And the key to what we do is we optimize and align safety and operational management systems to improve both safety and operational performance. That's kind of, how we look at safety and helping companies see the benefits of improved production and safety. And so we're going to talk a lot about leadership and safety in this presentation, and I want to introduce real quickly David and Anthony. David?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. My name is David Valentine. I'm the former director of safety for Shara Solutions out of Louisville, Kentucky. I have been in the construction industry for about 27 years. The past 8 to 9 years working with Shara Solutions. They are a mission critical provider of services to the power generation industry across the broad spectrum of both fossils and nuclear power as well. So thanks, Mike.
And Anthony.
Hey, Mike, thank you. And I'm Anthony Roy. Retired from Gray Construction several years ago and kind of family-owned business now. Worked in the construction industry for 30 plus years.
Yeah, and so well, thank you, Anthony and David. And Anthony and David really are the stars of the show. Before we get started, though, I want to pose a question to everybody on the call. So in the chat box, if you can, just we'll take a minute and a half, 2 minutes, answer this question. What in your mind is the biggest safety and health challenge that your organization faces? And so just a quick 1 or 2 question answer in the chat box. And I want to hear about what are some of the struggles that you guys are having out in the field. COVID, PPE. Yeah, it seems like our conversations more and more are related to COVID. Thank you, Patrick. What else? What are you guys challenged with? Effective communication across all levels. Brent Knight. Well, it's important that, I wanted to frame it this way. It's like, what's your biggest safety and health challenge? Because in our view, what we see oftentimes is a disconnect between how companies manage safety and how they manage other parts of the business. And so oftentimes, through our experience was that problems in safety are oftentimes just symptoms of leadership issues deep inside the business. And again, it's that disconnect. And, success in any area of business requires, leaders who lead by example, clarity around roles and responsibilities. Everybody knows what they're responsible for and what the rules of the game are. And there's shared expectations for performance. And so when we talk about performance, we're talking about performance in any measure of business, not just safety. And it's those leaders who demonstrate that unwavering commitment to protecting human life and getting work done safely, both through what they say, but also through what they do, achieve greater levels of operational performance. And now you can expect me to say that because I'm a safety guy. But that's why it's so important to have guys like Anthony and David to share those real world boots on the ground examples of guys who have lived it for 30 plus years, who have and Anthony especially coming from it from an operational perspective and being a leader and seeing the benefits of making those investments in safety. It's how organizations get work done and how they get work done safely is a product of the alignment of safety and operations. It's how organizations, it's more about narrowing the gap between getting work done and getting work done safely and improving how individuals, teams communicate, collaborate, plan, and execute. And we hope to show you today 3 examples of things that we've lived in throughout our career of ways that investments in safety have resulted in returns on investments 5, 10, 15, 20-fold. So let's go. So, let's look at the first, jump to the next slide, Georgia. And so again, it goes back to this disconnect that we see. When we see problems in business, and I'm not talking about just safety problems, whether it's production problems, quality problems, you've got high turnover, you got low morale, what have you got, team infighting, what have you. It's usually a product of, again, their leadership issues. So how can we lead more intentionally and be more proactive and be a better leader and influence people through what we say and what we do, right? So you have to, so the problems that we see oftentimes is that business leaders are sending mixed signals to their team, both in what they say and what they do. So people don't understand really where to take direction and use it as a way when there's a point in time on a project to make a decision, they really don't have a good barometer of what their leaders want from them, and so that causes confusion and chaos. And then, you've got issues where people don't understand what they're personally responsible for and how they are accountable for delivering results, for safety results. What is their part in delivering those results, and what are they accountable for? Not just in terms of results, but for the activities that drive the results. And then lastly, the biggest problem that we're going to talk about today is understanding where you're measuring performance, understanding where your company lies, and how can we better measure performance beyond those lagging indicators. How can we build metrics that allow us to identify when there's a heightened level of risk so that we can course correct and reinvest and allocate resources without getting people hurt. And so this leads us into our first slide. Georgia? And so I want to turn it over to David. The first one is safety as a core value drives operational excellence. David, take it away.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody joining us today. I think this is some important information for us to share and hopefully provide some opportunities for people to take this information and improve on their operations that they're currently working with. The one thing that I always want to talk about is we have a lot of times where companies will say that safety is a core value, or sometimes safety is our #1 priority. And the thing that we need to understand is those are two different things. A core value is something that never changes. It is as if it's cast in stone. Whereas being priorities, those can shift depending on what the challenges in the market are. Now, to have a true commitment to safety, it has to be real. And that means that the actions of the leaders have to match what the leaders' words are conveying, or the message that you're trying to send. And they have to be consistent in the demonstration of those expectations, not only in themselves, but in the teams that they lead. For an example, if you've got a leader that comes to a job site and they never have the PPE they need, but they're borrowing it from the job site, or they're using it, that might be there for visitors that are not familiar with the project. That kind of has a tendency to say that from a leadership standpoint, we believe in safety and we hope you've got the stuff that I need, but it's not important enough for me to carry it with me. So those are some things that you can look at in terms of indicator. And as Mike said earlier, and I think one of the attendees, Mr. Knight, said that the challenge really is effective communication across all levels. And he talked a little bit about documentation of activities. Did want to reiterate, the very best performing teams, those that have operational excellence, are very good at communicating, collaborating, planning, and executing their work. So they require that communication to flow both down and back up. And it does in such a manner that it is free flowing. It is not impeded by somebody in the middle. So that information is constantly moving back and forth. That's how really strong, committed teams, which have really strong, committed leaders, behave in a normal day-to-day activity. They're going to be the same way. They're going to perform the same way when they run up against certain situations, much like the situation we're in now with COVID-19. This is another challenge that every construction operation is dealing with. But if we have strong communications, if we have strong collaboration, if we are planning and we are executing, it's very easy to address some of these COVID-19 challenges that we have, because we're not looking to one person to solve that issue. We're looking to have a conversation amongst everybody and draw out where that experience may be and use the best of that. So I would think that, Michael, as we continue on, we're going to talk a little bit about documentation and how you document certain things. But when it comes to a real commitment to safety as a core value, it has to do with leaders being seen as doing what they're asking their teams to do.
Well, and that leads me to you, Anthony. Anthony shared with me a story about how their operations team was challenged to raise the bar, so to speak. So, Anthony, share with us that story that you shared with us about how Stephen challenged you guys.
Mike, and thank you and David both. And David hit on some key points there that as he was going through it, planning and communicating and collaborating and execution, and this goes back to the mid to late 90s, and when 100% tie-off really came effective through steel work throughout the industry. And working there at Gray, one of the challenges that came up, we decided one day at a meeting that we were going to require that all subcontractors that were steel erectors would go to 100% tie-off. Not just them, but throughout the entire job. And we got a lot of pushback as leaders of the company. And even myself, I was pushing back on the CEO of the company, saying, hey, this is going to drive up cost. We're already in a competitive market. How do we stay competitive when we're adding safety belts to every steel worker? Every guy that's going to be up on a drywall, hanging drywall 20 feet in the air and up on the ceiling, and guys doing 20-foot studs off scaffolds. And how are you going to add? You're going to add cost, and we're going to feel that. That was and we all felt that doing an estimate, you've been against your competitors. How do you stay competitive in that? And we had some subcontractors that really just refused to even participate or even being willing to step up to the plate. But we was bound and determined that's what we was going to do. First of all, we didn't want any incidents. I started using that word incidents, and I'm going to throw this in here just as a side note. We talked about lost time and accidents and recordables and lost recordables all my life. When we decided we want to track incidents, no matter what they was, whether it was a first aid, whether the guy dropped a hammer off a ladder, whether it was a piece of pipe drop, when you start tracking things to that level, it changes. That's another whole conversation for a different time. But if I look back on that, that's where we was leading to at that time. But if you look at the steel erectors and people stepped up, we had, as people went through this, subs were rejecting it. And they didn't want to do it. But the ones that really wanted to partner with us, even some of them said, hey, we're going to drive costs up. It could be a 0.5 point, it could be up to 1%, 2% of cost. And as we was looking at all that, even the challenge of the project teams, the teams putting it together, the estimators, the project managers, everybody had doubts of what was going to happen. But what we learned through that process, and I'll get into this in a minute with one key sub that taught us a lot. But before we did that, what we learned was we was a design build company. And what we started doing was going all the way down to our design department that was in-house. And we started looking, as we bid these projects, how we get more efficient at 100% tie-off. Is there ways to put cables on the roof, for example, to where the guys can use that as 100% tie-off? Was there ways to build bar joists instead of hanging one at a time to do them in panel sections? And all those things started coming together. And what I mean by that is we started pre-planning the project during the bid phase to help cover this, which in the end result actually lowered the cost of the project. And that's what sometimes we was overlooking because we was so entrenched in the woods and the water we was in so many times in my life, and I love to fish. But one of the things that always came up from Jim Gray and Howard a lot of times, it's hard for a fish to describe the water he lives in. And what happens, we get so used to that, and we're so used to doing our daily routine of things, we don't look outside the water we're in. And what we had to do is challenge ourselves to say, okay, there's other ways, there's other methods, there's other means. And now if you look at the industry through that 30 years of process, it's not even a question about tying off 100% of the time now. And companies have adapted that and adopted it, and they're just moving forward with it. And, one of the things, and I'll just, if it's okay with you, Mike, I'll tell the story about the subcontractor. And we had the steel erector, and he really partnered with us through this whole process. And one of the things that he came up with, to start with, he was pretty initially was resistant. And he said, man, you're going to drive my cost up. But if that's what you all want, that's what we're going to do. And I mean, we had like 3 different meetings that I remember in a conference room downtown Lexington, Kentucky with this contractor. And actually one was actually in Nashville, his place of business. And when we went through that process, it went for about 1.5 years, and we done 3 or 4 projects, and he helped us through them. And he came up with this panelized system of putting the bar joists in every bay of the building together and lifting them at one time. And all of a sudden, he started showing up to job sites with more aerial lifts and more scissor lifts, less people up on the roof, less people being exposed. Yes, they was tied off in those lifts, but he wasn't stretching those cables everywhere. So we asked him to analyze his costs during that whole process. And Howard Gray told Gary, he said, you track it for 18 months. And he said, if it costs you more doing it our way, the way we want to do it now, I'll find a way to reimburse you for it. At the end of that, he said it's the first initial 12 months. He couldn't really track whether it's break even or not. By the time he got to the 18th month period, it was over 18% savings of the way he used to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
And I love that story, right? And I think what you said, just to kind of to summarize that this whole story, is that what the team, both the internal Gray team and the subcontractors, they had in their mind this perceived cost, right? And
right.
Internally, it challenged the team to find efficiencies elsewhere,
right.
In the schedule and on the project. But at the end of the day, it made everybody more efficient. It made everybody more productive, and it drove down cost. And so right. I think that's just a beautiful story in a way that it took leadership to make that decision, because there was that initial resistance in the beginning, right? So you had to draw a line in the sand.
And as a leader, You know, as a leader, you can't back down from things that's going to be right. At the end of the day, we was sending more people home the way they showed up to work and less people the way they didn't show up to work. And that's what it's all about.
And I think this ties in greatly to our next key point, right, is that leaders are always focused on doing things better. And when we talk about this current situation that we're in with COVID-19, right? COVID-19, and somebody already said it in the chat, right? It's COVID-19. We want to know about COVID-19 PPE. This coronavirus is impacting how people deliver projects across the world, and especially here in the United States. It's impacting manufacturing, it's impacting construction, transportation. Nobody has escaped the coronavirus's impact. And some of the news are calling the coronavirus a black swan, but other people actually are referred to as a gray rhino. And what that means by that is that it's a highly probable but neglected threat. And you see this so much in construction, where just because we haven't, we measure safety by the number of accidents that we have. And that's a whole different discussion, right? We measure how safe we are by the number of people that we hurt. But, as long as we don't have any accidents, and as long as there's, nobody throwing up any red flags, then oftentimes there's not the momentum to want to change, right? No news is often good news. And because of that, and we see that currently with COVID. I mean, we have between 2011 and 2018, there were over 1,000 different epidemic events: SARS, MERS, Ebola, the yellow fever, and these hospitals ignored the warning signs, and as a result, we were caught unprepared. And I think that when accidents happen on a job site, companies find themselves unprepared because they had ignored the warning signs. And so, we see this play out on construction projects every day. As long as the TRIR or your incident rates or your EMR is low, safety is perceived as good. And we have to move away from that. We have to look at different ways to measure performance. Next slide, Virginia. So even if we accept the fact that lagging indicator of safety performance, what happens when we drive that number to zero, right? When you drive accidents to zero, and that's how you measure safety, then what information do you have available to indicate how close to the edge your organization is from experiencing the next accident? And so, David, you have had a lot of experience in this industry with incorporating leading indicators, and specifically your experience with the inverse relationship between accidents and near-miss reports. Can you speak to that? Next slide, Virginia, or Georgia.
That was, thanks, Mike. Something that Anthony touched on, briefly, and I, even though I ended my career with Shara in the performance field, I started, a lot of my time was with Gray Construction, and we did look at events, not just recordables and lost times. Well, we fine-tuned that when I've got to Shara, and we wanted to really look at how could we create a very open, very communicative focused environment on the job site, and how could we look at things and measure those that were going to lead to events and take actions to prevent them from happening. And we always looked at them as, whether you want to call it a near miss or a near hit, that's for you to choose what it is. We call them near misses. What we really were looking for is how can we learn a lesson without having to pay any kind of price. We didn't want to repair equipment. We didn't want to fix bodies. We didn't want to have to do rework. So how do we look at those things that almost happened, and what did they tell us in terms of how it related to an incident? And the data was overwhelming as we went month to month to month. The more near misses that were recorded, regardless of the quality of that near miss, whether it was a significant near miss of somebody dropping a hammer off the level 5 of a power plant, or whether somebody tripped over a garden hose that was laid out in the parking lot, regardless of the quality of that near miss, what we found is that the more near misses we had, we saw the incident rates of those job sites actually going the other direction or going down. And what it really played into was we had so much exposure and so much risk out there that we probably had a lot more potential for events and incidents than we thought. But once we started identifying what those near misses were, we were taking those potential statistics out of the equation. So we focused on that highly, and we looked at promoting near misses, not only promoting them, but rewarding those near misses when they were reported. So we had a program that incentivized not only the number of near misses that we reported, but the quality of them as well. Every month, we would look at all of the near misses that were submitted to the corporate office, and I would choose one that I thought yielded as much information or probably led to more changes in either policies, procedures, or other processes. And we would actually reward that team with lunch. We had a traveling trophy that had a nameplate on it that had their job site and the month of their report. It was just something to keep the importance of that near miss reporting out there in their eyes and in their minds as to how important that really was. Not only that, but we took that and shared that information as well. So when those near miss reports got submitted, within 24 hours, every leader in our organization had a copy of those near miss reports narrative wise, maybe not everything, but at least a narrative, so that they could talk about it with their teams as well that they led. And they always had weekly calls or a daily call where they were talking to certain projects. So the thing that really came to light for us was the more that we talk to the guys at the front line, the more we get them to communicate back to us what they see, what they feel, what they hear, what bothers them. That increased the performance of those teams tremendously. And we'll talk a little bit later, Mike, maybe about some of the things that we did related to observations.
Sure. Anthony, real quick, you and I have talked at length about this concept of budgeted versus unbudgeted impacts to a project. Can you talk about that for a second? Take 2 minutes.
Okay. Hey, Mike. Yeah, one of the things that we soon realized that you can budget for a project. You estimate it, you put the budget together, and you start down a project. But the most painful thing to it all is the things that's unforeseen, the things that happen that you're not planning for. And that goes to that, the worst thing that you can ever hit you is something you're not really planning for and you're not expecting. And what happens when you have an accident on a project? I like to call them an incident. And David even said about the near misses. If you're planning and looking and you're taking near misses and planning, you're putting a plan in place that hopefully you prevent any incident or accident that occurs. If you're taking those out of the equation, your numbers at the end of that job has got to be better, because then you're staying inside your original budget. But when an accident or an incident occurs and you've not planned for it, or you can't plan for that, it's hard to put a magnitude of dollars to that. But when that happens, the overall project suffers, the overall outcome suffers. It's hard to recover from that. And it affects not just the dollars, it affects the morale of the people, it affects the morale of the customer, the subcontractors are affected, all the way around. Or, you can pay attention to it, and you can also pre-plan and allocate enough funds that you can put preventions in place in the budget. If you're estimated up front, which is something else we started doing, as we went through this and started looking at near misses, we actually started putting money in the projects and say, okay, how do we prevent accidents and incidents versus just accepting what we get? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think a great example of that would be like, there was milestones in the project, or those key events where you would send guys like me. I remember going down to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and overseeing a critical lift, seeing a sequence of events where there's a heightened level of risk. So just so we can commit some more resources to make sure things go off without a hitch. And I think and that leads us to our last point. When my experience at Gray Construction, on larger projects, there would be staff with dedicated safety support, but I would say the majority of the projects were not. And David, so the main point was that the expectation for maintaining those high levels of communication, collaboration, planning, and execution fell on the project team. So David, take 2 minutes or 3 minutes and talk about how there was no difference in performance expectations for quote unquote safety guys and just the rest of the project team.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And that's a great point. Is in construction and the experiences that I had with Shar Solutions, we had projects that might have 40 or 50 guys on them that were much larger civil type projects, and we had some routine operations that might only have 5 or 6 guys on them. Now, in a power plant, the risks are there. Whether there's 50 guys there or there's 5 guys there, the risks are there. The only difference is the potential for exposure, meaning 50 versus 5. But what every leader, whether it's a safety leader on a large project that is a resource to that project leader, or whether it's that project leader that is acting as his own safety resource, the level of accountability is the same for those teams. There has to be an orientation process. Everybody needs to understand what the rules and regulations are. You know, where do I park? Where's my PPE? Where do we park equipment? All of those things are the same. If you've got pre-construction safety meetings, like you said, Michael, crane lifts, critical items such as that, the responsibility is the same across the board, whether there's a safety person on that job site or not. Leadership in an organization sets those expectations for all of those teams at the same level, and they measure performance in the same way. So it's not, we're going to measure you differently because there's only 6 of you here, or we're going to measure you a little bit differently if there's 50 of you on the project because of the challenges. It is setting expectations and taking the measurables and making sure that they align with what is expected from that organization. So I think that's very important to highlight, that regardless of the size of a project or regardless of the complexity of a project, setting expectations and measuring those performance standards is very important for leaders across an organization.
I mean, I think that's, you hit the point of it, is that, you know, the team members had a singular focus. There was no daylight between getting work done and getting work done safely. It all just became how we did things. And I think that one of the things it also did is it sent the message that in order for you to grow within this organization, you have to be a safety leader, right? You cannot be the best site manager with the poorest safety record and expect, you know, to move up or expect to get assigned those, you know, those marquee projects. You know, success in safety and your success in your profession was one and the same.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because that's a lot of what I've looked at in organizations that have struggled in terms of safety performance. The first thing you want to look at is, how do you get promoted in this organization?
Exactly.
And
right.
if they say, well, we promote the guys that deliver the projects, we promote the guys that save the most money, we promote the guys that beat the schedules, yeah, but where does safety fit in there? What is the calibration point that you use to say, at this level, that's acceptable performance? And if you don't have guys that are meeting the minimum level of performance in terms of safety, which should be maximum performance if it's a core value, but yet you're still promoting them because they beat schedules, budgets, and everything else, that you're sending a very clear sign, and you're communicating very clearly to everybody else on that team what the true expectations of performance are.
Right. So we're 3 minutes over, or a lot of time, but I want to just summarize those 3 key points, and then we'll open up for questions. And I think we've demonstrated that issues within safety aren't traditional safety problems. They're really leadership issues within the business. And so in order to drive performance in any respect, but especially in safety has to be a core value. And then leaders, you know, should be always focused on doing things better. And then leaders create that accountability for performance. And so with that, Georgia, I'll turn it over to you, and hopefully we have some questions. And you're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that have come through. Thank you all for distilling your experience. That was a fantastic overview. And the first question we've got is from Patrick. And the question is, if near misses don't correlate to where your actual losses occur, it's like hunting deer with your gun aimed overhead. So he said BBS is great, but it has shortcomings. Have you got any comments on that approach?
Yeah, Mike, I do. I got that. And Patrick, that is a great point to talk about. We didn't talk really a lot about behavioral-based safety and observations. We had a behavioral-based safety system as well. The problem is a lot of people will go buy something stock and put it into the technology that they can use, such as their iPhones or their iPads. And too often they're not specific enough to what's going on in that organization in terms of what they're looking for. We, being that we were more civil than true construction in terms of vertical construction, we had a lot of equipment on the job site, and we very specifically focused on mounting and dismounting of equipment as being one of the prime things that we looked at. Only because in the 7.5 to 8 years that I was at Shara, 75% of our lost time events occurred in the mounting or dismounting of equipment, whether it was getting in and out of a cab at a break, or whether it was checking the oil or the hydraulic fluid during a pre-startup. So you have to really take a behavioral-based safety system, and it needs to focus specifically on those items that you see as critical to your performance and the issues where you have. So just exactly like you said, if the near misses don't correlate to where your actual losses are and your BBS system doesn't align to that, it really is, like you said, hunting deer with your gun aimed overhead. So I agree with you 100%. You've got to be specific. You can't be general in nature. You need to fine tune it on a continual basis and really continue to sharpen the point, shall we say, because that's where you're going to find the most information. But good observation. Great question.
Michael, I've got one for you. So we've got, so how could this approach support insurance companies or contractors seeking competitive products and premiums?
Well, I mean, I think that this, everything that we do is designed to, reduce losses, improve our risk profile, make us more efficient. So in my mind, anybody can benefit from this, not just insurance, not just people who are looking to, for a competitive insurance bid. But at the end of the day, I mean, in my mind, it's all about establishing a process to get better. And if you can, so much, again, going back to what I was saying about accident rates, it's determining without, removing the luck factor, right? Are we lucky or are we good? Right? Did we get the results that we get because we have good processes and systems in place, or do we get the results that we get because we've just been lucky? And especially going back to near misses, right? Really understanding when a near miss happens, okay, did we avoid getting somebody seriously hurt, or did we avoid a serious property damage incident because we had good controls in place, or were there just nobody just happened to be in the area at that time? So it's understanding the difference between lucky and good. And I think that, the more that companies can focus on that, the fewer losses they're going to have, the higher level of performance, more productive they're going to be. That will drive the EMR down. That will drive traditional metrics, the incident rates down. But you'll also see it in improved productivity. You also see it in higher levels of morale and employee engagement. And that's really, you start to really see some return on investments.
Fantastic. And then last question that we've got that's come through is, what piece of advice would you give to a company or our attendees if they said, I want to start tomorrow, where do I start?
Michael, can I add to that one?
Yep.
Well, one of the things I would say is you need to, as a leader of the company, the leadership needs to take it from the top down. And if they don't embrace it, there's a saying that used to go that I was taught early on in my career, and it goes like this: if you see it and walk past it, you condone it. If you see it and take care of it in time, then you're participating. And you're helping to recognize and see that people around you are seeing that you're participating to make a difference. So in safety, it goes along the same way. So if you're out as a leader of that company, and David hit on this earlier, as leadership, one of the things that we learned while he was there with us was, as leaders, we started packing our own bags with our steel-toed shoes in them, our hard hats, and our safety glasses. And when we got on a plane or when we got in the truck, those were part of the stuff that we took to the job site. I didn't expect the job sites to have my boots, my hat, my shield, my gloves, anything I needed to go visit that job site, I should have it as a leader of that company. And when you get that, to make a big difference, the leaders have got to step up. You can't do it. So long in the history of my history there at that company, we tried to do it from the field up. And when we decided we took it from the top down, it made a big difference. And that's where the near misses come in. It's kind of like sometimes we look back through history, and I read a book one time, it said, in order for you to, if you want to provide the door of opportunity for people to walk through and to make improvements, you've got to provide them with the correct tools to walk through those doors. So you got to prepare them and train them and develop them. But in order to do that, you got to have good leaders that's got good plans on what those doors need to be and how they get open. And leadership is key to that. You know, and I was just looking at some of the notes I had, and throughout that, the challenge of leaders is being ones that when you're holding people accountable, you want accountability where it can be recognized, and you want people to hold each other accountable. And accountability goes down just from if the CEO is doing it, the next thing you know, the vice presidents are doing it. It goes all the way down to labor in the field. The labor then will hold the next guy to him accountable to make sure he's either tying off or that he's got his glasses on. All that stuff becomes, you hold each other accountable just like you do in a family. So anyway, I just thought I'd answer that. I hope I'd answered the question well.
And Mike, two points I'd like to make there. First of all, you got to understand that this is a journey, and it's not a journey that's going to be taken in a 1-week period. So Amen. Figure out what parts you want to start with first. If you want to start with culture, then understand you've got to establish culture and be able to clearly define what that culture is. If you've got a good culture and you want to move into leading indicators versus lagging, identify just one of those that you want to challenge and set that up and understand it's going to take 18 months to 2 years to get it fully moving along to where it becomes its own device driving forward. When we took up BBS, I made it very clear to the team, this is a 3 to 5 year venture. We are not going to see success in that within 3 to 5 years. It's going to take that period of time. So if you think that 18 months in, we're going to have perfect data and we're going to have perfect reporting and we're going to have, it's just not going to happen that fast. So figure out what you want to do, set realistic expectations. And then the final thing is find a mentor. Find somebody who has done this before, whether it be if you're an executive leader and you want to undertake this for the organization you lead, find somebody at your level that has done this before. If nothing else, just somebody to bounce ideas off of or to vent. A lot of times when I was going through my career, I would call somebody and say, can I just vent? Absolutely. And they would let me vent and say, do you feel better? I do now. Just somebody that you can lean on, somebody can provide you advice, but somebody also that can just let you talk. And they can listen to it and be able to say, it's okay. These are the same things that we've all gone through in our career. You're not, you're not abnormal in feeling these things that you're feeling. So start slow with small things. Make sure you got realistic expectations on when they're going to happen, and find somebody that you can vent to.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
David must vent to you then, Michael. So that's all the questions that we've got for today. I'd love to give time back to everyone so that they can get on and enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you everyone who has joined us today. Very special thanks to our panelists at Calibrate Safety. You've all been fantastic. I loved all the stories. I think it really helps to exemplify what we're talking about. There's an immense power in that. We have recorded this presentation and it will be available on demand. So if you liked what you heard, you want to come back to it or you want to share it, it'll be available and we'll send out a link to you via email in the next week or so. Thank you all again. And that's it for us.